Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day to day lives. Let's start with the video. My husband and I have been married for 5 years, together for 7, and throughout the span of our relationship, my mother in law has always been quite eccentric. It always seemed like she had nothing against me specifically, but she had always maintained sort of a distance with me. Whenever we spent time together, I could tell that she was a sweet woman, even through her hesitation to open up around me. At first, when my husband and I were dating, I thought her unwillingness to open up was only limited towards me. But as time went by and I was invited to more family events, I realized that she was like this with everyone except for my husband. It was only to my husband that she would talk without any hesitation or fear. This was puzzling since all of her other children were quite literally amazing to her and even me. So everyone was understandably quite worried for her and would often try to probe around to see the potential cause behind the change in behavior. Unfortunately, this did not help, and this behavior of hers just kept worsening as years passed by. And eventually, we all just chalked it up to her age. But boy, that was far from the case, and I would only find that out years after. I'm either completely blind, but there weren't really other red flags that I could take a note of, especially coming from my husband, if what my mother in law was saying is truly right. Throughout the span of our relationship, my husband has been nothing but a good father to our children, a great provider, and a decent partner. I call him a decent partner only because of his inability to communicate openly and honestly. I would be able to chalk his inability to communicate on his stress due to his high pressure job. My husband is often on trips that last for a couple of months, and although I totally understand that it is hard to keep in contact when your job asks for so much of your time, we still have small arguments here and there regarding how he doesn't call much when he's on one of his trips. Well, this is where the situation starts. My husband was out on yet another one of his business trips. This isn't new to us, so my twins and I were going about our daily routine. During these trips, or even when my husband is home, my mother in law does not really call or visit. So when I heard the doorbell ring and I opened it to my mother in law standing with a huge bag in her hand, I was quite confused. What was more weird was that she immediately invited herself in and she just looked like she was quite stressed. She held this bag closer to her and wouldn't even let me help her bring it in. She walked around for a bit, navigating around the house, I guess trying to find a room. At this point, her silence was making me quite annoyed, so I started flooding her with questions because seeing the worried look on her face made me quite anxious. So when I got no response, I had no option to just look at what she was doing. Around 5 minutes passed this way, and I am just following mother in law around until she just looks at me and tells me to take my children to a safe place. This is when alarm bells start ringing, and I start to become more assertive and alert. But first, to be completely safe, I make my children sit in one of our guest bedrooms and call my sister to come pick them up at her place. After the call, I follow my mother in law into the kids' room and I'm greeted with this view that leaves me speechless. I was standing there with my mouth wide open as my mother in law picked up a literal baby out of this huge bag she was carrying. She placed him on one of my son's beds as she just looked at me blankly and told me to take care of him until she came back. I was mortified not only at the fact that this woman had just quite literally taken out a baby from her bag, and now she's telling me to take care of him. I knew I wasn't going to take care of a baby. I knew nothing. So obviously, I immediately denied and told her that if she wasn't going to tell me what was going on, I wouldn't hesitate to call the cops. And her response to my threat shocked me even more. She simply just told me that if I did that, then it would be my husband who would have to bear the consequences of my action. She told me this like it was nothing serious before just getting up and leaving, telling me to be a good wife and do this little favor for my husband. This is where I'm at currently, stuck with a baby who I know absolutely nothing about. All of this happened within the span of an hour, and I know I have most likely dealt with it terribly. My sister has picked up and left with my kids for a couple of days, while my husband once again is not receiving any of my calls, texts. What should I do here? I want to take a firm step before it becomes too late. By the looks of it, I feel like my family, especially my children, will be in grave danger, and I just really want to take the appropriate steps to ensure their safety. Should I call the cops? Or just comply with what my mother-in-law is saying? WIBTA for filing a report to the police after I found my mother-in-law leaving a completely random baby in my kid's room? After reading your replies and talking to my family, I came to the realization that I really did need to call the cops. Right before I left for the same, I received a text from my husband telling me to wait and that he'll explain everything to me once he returns home. Well, I wasn't going to wait for him this time. Yes, this really isn't the first time he's made me wait for something that's never going to come, and this explanation was one of them. I knew I had to take a stand to ensure the safety of not only my own kids, but this baby, who probably has parents, guardians waiting for him. So I took him to the cops and explained everything that happened to them. They told me to take the baby along with me until they catch a hold of my mother-in-law. So I just returned home, and that is when my phone started blowing up with texts and messages, not just from sister-in-law, but also my father-in-law and brother-in-law berating me for going to the cops and taking away their mother, who has apparently come back to them after a long time. I have no idea how to respond to them since I don't know what actually went down to begin with. I think I'm just going to wait on my husband and the cops before reacting adversely. It's been 2 days since this entire situation took place, and describing everything as a roller coaster would be an understatement. My life has turned upside down within these past 2 days, and I can't help but blame my husband and mother-in-law for this. So my husband returned home yesterday, and he wasn't alone. He was back with a woman of our age. My husband looked like he had been dealing with a lot, and as soon as I saw him, I knew something was very off. The gut feeling in my stomach just told me that I needed to get ready to hear the worst, and my husband did exactly that. As soon as he and the lady walked in and sat down, he introduced her as Lydia. My heart sank to my stomach as I recognized her as the same person my husband would talk about during our initial days of dating. Lydia was his high school sweetheart, and it just clicked to me that the child I was seeing was none other than their son. I immediately began crying as Lydia murmured sorry under her breath, and my husband just stared at me blindly with no remorse in his eyes. He then went on to explain that he had only married and dated me because his dad was against him dating Lydia, since she did not belong to their financial status. My dad wanted to take over his dad's business, and so went along with our relationship, all the while not just dating Lydia, but also marrying her and having 2 other children with her. Lydia didn't know about any of this either until the last couple of weeks. This is what caused the argument between the two of them, causing Lydia to leave their home. My mother-in-law had dropped all the 3 kids at different relatives' place, so as not to cause any suspicion, but obviously the plan horribly failed, as my mother-in-law was taken in by the cops, and my husband and Lydia are now facing charges for child abandonment. I was dumbfounded hearing all of this. I felt stupid for not even having a clue that all of this was taking place behind my back, but it was only the point when my husband started talking about how Lydia had given him an ultimatum to pick between her or I that made him want to come clean. Apparently, he is stable enough at this point to be able to face his dad and live his life. Being devastated would be an understatement here. This man, who I thought loved me so much that he'd have kids with me, just turned his back on me. I was devastated, but soon enough my sadness turned into a rage and told my husband to be ready to be served and that our marriage was over. I kicked him and Lydia out of my house. Yes, my house. It was gifted to me by my parents, and thankfully, they made my husband sign a prenuptial agreement before our wedding. So I will be visiting a lawyer soon and trying to get things into place as soon as possible. We'll post another update soon. I had completely forgotten about this post until yesterday when my divorce with my now ex-husband got finalized. Right after I signed on the last couple of documents, I remembered how I had posted here frantically asking for advice. I feel like I have grown so much ever since then. I feel like even while being old, maturity has taken over me on a completely different level. These past few months have given me a lot of time to think and reflect about a lot of things, and although this realization is accompanied with pain and grief, I feel like I will be able to get over it with time. Now, currently, my main focus is getting my life on track while making my children slowly get used to the absence of their dad and his family, who were previously very involved in their lives. Yes, along with my ex husband, his family too decided to cut us out because apparently, as long as their mom was back, they were happy. And even though this decision was hard to swallow at the start, now it just feels like the trash has taken itself out of our lives. My mother in law, along with Lydia, is spending about a month in jail for child abandonment and endangerment. I have no remorse for the three of them, but just feel bad for the children who have to be with parents like my ex husband and Lydia. I will wish nothing but the best for them, and with that, I hope this new chapter in my life brings good things for my children and everyone around me. NTA, but how much do I gotta bet that the baby either belongs to the husband or is the affair child of mother in law? I would rush to the cops ASAP because by the way OP describes the situation, I feel like something really bad is going to happen, and taking precautions in such a situation is a must. NTA, run to the cops now. It is surprising that you would even ask. This entire post screams red flags. From the husband to the mother-in-law are all onto something evil, and I would suggest OP to take a step back and reevaluate everything. Some context. This was said in therapy in front of a therapist, along with the reason I believe this, and it comes after a decade of marriage for my dad and his wife. Onto the history. I lost my mom when I was 5. My dad started dating Jane when I was 6, and they married when I was 7. Jane was a divorced mom. She had an 8-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old daughter, and a 6-year-old son. They split time between Jane's and their dad's house, whereas me, having lost my mom, I was at the house all the time. This made Jane's kids really jealous. They hated that I got to be with their mom all the time, while they had to be without one of their parents every other week. What made it worse is Jane started calling me her daughter. She put me before her bio kids. She chased after my love and affection and wanted me to call her mom. She would always talk about how I needed a mom, and my dad was just as crappy with that. They figured she could be the substitute since my mom was gone and were unable to realize that nobody could replace or take over from my mom in my heart. So while Jane was focusing on me over her kids, they were getting my dad, who was trying to bond with them, but not as much as Jane with me since they had their dad. It led to them hating me even more. Jane never listened to me when I told her that her kids needed her. She said I needed her too, and I was her kid too. She meant it to be this bonding thing that would make me happy and feel loved, but I never liked that. She was never my mom, so it never made sense to put me before them, and I felt bad for her kids. So now I'm 17 and the others are 18, 17, and 16. My dad and Jane's marriage has not been good of late, and I suspect they are headed for divorce. But they wanted to try and make it so the family they created would not be broken by the divorce. So they wanted us all in therapy together. Her kids thought it was just going to be Jane and them, and was super upset when they saw me and my dad there. The therapist was really unhappy with them hiding the truth, which leads to the event in question. We got about 5 sessions in when the therapist and I were kind of dominating since I was the kid who was the most engaged, and because she saw I had a different view from my dad and Jane. She asked why I believed we were there, and I said that my dad and Jane had failed to make a blended family, but they so desperately wanted to believe that they could at least say they had made one. I said Jane was ignoring her kids for me, and to make it worse, doing so, when they eventually realized I wasn't trying to take their mom, I didn't even want her, and meant that they would never want any part of this. And I had someone try to force this new replacement mom thing on me as though my mom was insignificant. I said it was one big failure, and deep down they knew it. My dad was furious, and Jane was heartbroken. Her kids kind of nodded at what I said, though I think it kills them to agree with me. Dad said I was cruel. AITA? NTA, the point of family therapy is to get stuff like that said in a place where the feelings it will inevitably create can be dealt with instead of keeping it hidden in order to avoid causing feelings in the first place. Hopefully, your dad and Jane's feelings about what you've told them can be something the therapist helps them to deal with. They shouldn't have dumped those feelings on you, though. NTA, Jane massively overstepped in her role as step parent to the point of neglecting her own children. These kids don't even like you, and they're on the same page. If teenagers who don't like each other all agreeing against you isn't damning evidence, I don't know what is. My ex and I have been divorced 11 years. We've both remarried. We have a 17-year-old together. She has several steps and halves on my side, and then two half siblings on her dad's, 4 and 5. We never force her to babysit, but she'll do it in exchange for other chores and babysit for other people's kids for extra cash. And I think she secretly likes it more than she lets on. She's a good kid. She's saving up for something, so unusually she offered to babysit her dad's kids, 4 and 5, as much as he would let her during her recent 2-week stay. He, OFC, jumped at the opportunity to have a few date nights with his wife. I barely know his kids, so I can't make a judgment, but per my daughter, they're boring and have too much TV, tablet time. But in my ex's defense, they both work full-time jobs, whereas at our house, she has a live-in grandma and a stepdad that works from home, plus more older kids. So it's easier for us to keep the kids from having too much screen time and give them attention. And we have a backyard. They live in a condo. But at the end of her visit, her dad called me, obviously upset, and said that 17-year-old was going to be grounded for her last night with them because she screwed with the Wi-Fi. I thought he meant parental controls or something, so I was concerned, and then he clarified that she had been turning off the Wi-Fi while babysitting and telling the kids it was broken. And oh well, I guess we'll have to play a game now. She openly told her dad it was because she was bored. I'm not sure either kid mentioned it to the parent, but I guess not enough because it took them a few date nights to realize what was going on. Once I fully understood what my ex was saying, I couldn't help laughing and saying, "You're mad at her for playing with your kids instead of just watching TV with them." And he was like, "She's not their parent. It was too controlling. She lied to them." I was like, "She did you a favor." They even did a craft with her, and he got upset at me and said that this was where her attitude came from. Ironically, her grounding was taking away her devices for the night. She didn't even mention the punishment to me, but I'm still in hot water with my ex for undermining his parenting. He actually wanted me to have my own talk with her and potentially continue the punishment or at least the conversation in some way, which we both do for actual offenses, and I refused. She's not the kind of kid who would tell her dad, stepmom, to their faces that she thought his kids should have less screen time. But he might have picked up on her feelings anyway, so maybe that's where this is coming from. NTA, your daughter is resourceful, creative, and engaging. You see the value in her decision. He has limited views and is not applying critical thinking. No punishment necessary. She deserves a raise. NTA, what's sad is, I bet it was the best time his kids had had in ages.